On the October 17th, 1991 airing of Later with Bob Costas, actor Mark Harmon talked about his career, starting off as a son of a Heisman Trophy winning football player. He followed his dad's footsteps and ended up being quarterback at UCLA. His sister had married Ricky Nelson, so he got a gig on a spin-off show of Ozzie and Harriet called Ozzie's Girls as his acting debut. And then Jack Webb took him under his wing, and he appeared in a bunch of his productions, including Adam 12. And Harmon went on to really click when he became a cast member of St. Elsewhere. And significantly, he was the first major TV character to die of HIV. He was promoting his series Reasonable Doubts, and Costas touched upon his role as Ted Bundy in the film Deliberate Stranger. This is a really cool interview with somebody that we've come to watch even more and more over the last 30 years. He went from playing a character on JAG to 20 years later it getting reinvented for NCIS, where he's now executive producer of the series. So kudos, Mark Harmon. He escaped the shadow of a dad. He followed his pathway and then created...
Thanks for staying up later. Mark Harmon is with us. He's in the new program Reasonable Doubts. We'll talk about that shortly. And, of course, we'll get to his role on St. Elsewhere and his part as Ted Bundy in The Deliberate Stranger. But we're going to go all the way back, since we have the half hour, of course, to your days as a young athlete. And as many of your fans know, your father, Tom Harmon, won the 1940 Heisman Trophy. He was a tremendous running back at the University of Michigan. Did he encourage you to be an athlete? Was he ambivalent or what?
No, he wasn't. My dad wasn't ambivalent about anything, Bob. You know, he had an opinion and a gentlemanly way of stating it when he thought he needed to be heard. You know, I kind of grew up watching a film of 33 touchdowns that my dad scored at Michigan, that Michigan had put together for him when he graduated. And so for the first 7 or 8 years of my life, you know, I never thought my dad ever got tackled. I mean, every time he touched the ball, he scored. And you know, I said quite honestly when I enrolled at UCLA, and they have a form you fill out that said, greatest football player you've ever seen, and I wrote my dad's name in there. And I think people looking at that might have said, well, that's cute, it's his father. But the reality of it is quite honestly, in the footage I had seen, I haven't ever seen anybody who's approached that kind of I mean, he was just bigger, better, faster, stronger than anybody else on the field, and if he couldn't run by you, he'd run over you. And I grew up with a very honest respect as to how he got to be where he was and who he was, you know.
And also came from a time where, unlike today, where a superstar athlete has a certain celebrity attached to him, then there was a mythology. Now there's not so much mythology because we're too close to them and too many games are on television and there's a different style of sports reporting. But if a guy won the 1940 Heisman Trophy, all you had of him were some grainy black and white films and word of mouth or maybe a few radio broadcasts. Talk about larger than life.
Yeah, and in my dad's case, they were one of the first teams to actually fly coast to coast to play Berkeley. And I guess it took 2 days to make the trip, and when they did finally get there, it happened to be my dad's 21st birthday, the 28th of September, 1940. And my dad scored every point for Michigan that day. And that trip was covered in Life magazine, and my dad said until his death that if every person who has come up to him in his life and said, I was there in Strawberry Canyon the day you scored all 28 points, was indeed there in that stadium, and there would have been an attendance of about 6 million, you know. But you know, it was bigger than life, and it was almost a Paul Bunyan kind of atmosphere that my dad's lore was created in. I mean, it was really about the news footage that you saw when you went to the movie house on a Saturday afternoon.
You had a good career at UCLA as a quarterback, at least part of the time a wishbone quarterback, as I remember it. And the game that really sticks out is the one where you snap that long Nebraska winning streak. I mean, Nebraska's always good, But at that time, they were a real juggernaut. They had a long winning streak going. I think Johnny Rodgers was on that team.
Johnny Rodgers, Rich Glover, Willie Harper, Joe Blayhawk. I mean, they had 5 consensus All-Americans, as I remember, and they had not lost in 34 consecutive games, I think. And UCLA was 2-7-1 the year before, and they recruited heavily out of junior college, which is where I came from. And I think, you know, that opening game in the Coliseum, people do recall that, but, you know, we were supposed to get beat by 100 points, and we ended up winning 2017.
And so the flanker for UCLA is Lyman going out to the right side. Fake. Beautiful strike on the dead run to Brad Lyman. Mark Harmon racking it in there for 6 points. Everybody in tight. Does this 32-game winning streak go down the tube? Well, we'll know in a second. Herrera's kick is up. It's good.
Your dad was broadcasting the UCLA games that you played in?
Yeah, he was doing it for 6 years before I chose UCLA to go to school. And when I did choose UCLA, he in fact offered to J.D. Morgan to step down and said, look, you know, it's not every day that a father has to sound off, you know, about his son. And J.D. said, absolutely not, we want you here. And he continued to broadcast the games well after I left. And there was a bit of a family joke because part of the way he avoided bias was he would say the quarterback goes back to pass. Quarterback fakes down the line, or, you know, whatever. And it became a joke, and that became my nickname around the house, which was the quarterback. But he used to let Gary Beeman, who was the color man, he used to let him be the one to add the color adjectives to everything.
And the critique.
Yeah, and the critique. And no, my dad was pretty good at the critique part.
Did he come down hard on you sometimes?
No, sometimes. I mean, but it was never without reason, you know. It was never, I mean, when we beat Nebraska in that game, I mean, my dad, you know, I knew where I stood with my dad always, and when we beat Nebraska in that game in the Coliseum, I remember at the end of the game tearing off my chin strap and stuffing it in my pants and sprinting for the locker room, and people were tearing off wristbands and pads and shoes. And anyway, I got in the locker room, and I was there 10 minutes before anybody else got in there. Everybody was out celebrating. And the coaches came into the room, and all the players shut the doors off and said a few words. And the doors opened, and there was press a mile deep that wanted to ask question after question after question. And it was a good two hours plus that I was in this locker cubicle answering questions, when finally I fought my way out of the cubicle toward the shower. And as I came around the corner, there standing on the far wall of the Coliseum was my dad, leaning up against the wall. He was standing out there the entire time, never came into the cubicle. And he said, hey. And I turned and I looked at him, and he said, great game. And I just chilled, you know, and I started crying, and he started crying. I reached out and I hugged him, and I can be thankful for many things in my career at UCLA, but none more than that moment. And I feel gifted to have had that moment and to have known him in that capacity. And football provided that.
You're probably too small to grade high on a lot of the scouting reports. In the modern era, they usually want an NFL quarterback to be 6'3", 6'4", somewhere in that vicinity. But at least you had a chance to try out with some NFL teams. What made you decide so emphatically, nah, that's it, college and I'm done?
You know, Bob, I never thought I was good enough. Honestly, I mean, I came out of junior college. My last junior college game, I threw the ball 58 times in my last game, and I was basically a VRT throwing quarterback, and we ran the sprint out. When I got to UCLA, I was a wishbone quarterback, and my entire senior year, I threw the ball maybe 35 times the entire year. So I think the thought that I had any possible career in the pros as a quarterback was a very weak one.
Do you miss the roar of the crowd? Is there something there that can never be replaced, or is that a completed chapter, that's fine? The end.
You know, now sitting here, I look back at it, and I think I was extremely lucky to have hit that when I did, and it's something I always wanted to do. I mean, I can remember going to the games at the Coliseum when I was a kid with my dad when he was broadcasting, and I remember running in front of him as fast as I could through the crowds of people and dodging. And I really look forward to that, and I look forward to running through the spectator tunnel, that dark tunnel, and at the end of that tunnel, the brilliance of that field, the first visual view you got of that field for the first time. And as a little boy, I always dreamed of maybe one day having the chance to walk through that tunnel to the sound of cleats hitting the pavement as a player. And so when that opportunity happened at UCLA, and the press was great at coming up and saying, gosh, how do you handle this? I mean, your dad's broadcasting the games, you're leading the number 3 ranked team in the nation, and, you know, doing this and doing that. How do you handle the pressure? I'd say pressure. I mean, in so many ways, this was such a fantasy for me. And in so many ways, when it was time for that career to end, I think my transition was as smooth mentally as it could have been. I pretty much fulfilled what it was I thought I could accomplish at that level, and then it was time to turn it and take what you learned in college educationally and make a career out of something else.
Fast forward. You're a struggling actor, I guess, as they all are. No matter how successful they want, they have to have a struggling actor phase. And you run into, somehow, I'm not clear how, you can tell me, you run into Jack Webb, and he gives you a boost.
Jack I had met on the rubber chicken circuit when I was doing speeches when I was in college. And I had met him, and long about 3 or 4 years after graduation from college, I had done a number of other jobs and studied acting at night. And I had sold shoes, I had been an advertising executive, I had done play-by-play, I had done color, I'd been a carpenter, a roofer, a drywall, and whatever. And I called Jack, and he's the only person I knew. I didn't have an agent and didn't know how to go about getting one. And at the time, he was a major producer at Universal. He had Dragnet, he had Adam 12, he had Emergency, he had something called High Sierra, or I don't know. But he took the call, and he said, what can I do for you, laddie? And I said,
laddie?
Laddie. And I said, Mr. Webb, I'd like to talk to you about being an actor. And he went, a what? And I said, actor. And he said, okay, come on in. So anyway, I came in, and I had longer hair, and I had a mustache, and he looked at me for the longest time, didn't say anything, and finally put some signs across the desk at me, and he said, you take those home, you learn them, you come back tomorrow looking like a cop, and we'll talk about it. So I took them, and I didn't know really what that meant, but I took them to my acting class. I worked on the scenes, got a buzz head haircut, cut off my mustache, came back the next day, and he took me right down to the set on Adam 12. He waited for the day of shooting to be completed, and he put me in a little scene with Kent McCord and Marty Milner walking down a hallway, and I got a little part on Adam 12. And you know, it's the way of the world, maybe, that, you know, long after people are gone, people say nice things. And when Jack was still around, you know, there weren't a lot of people saying nice things except for me, and I will always be very appreciative to him for giving me an opportunity when no one else would listen. And I learned a lot from him. He was a tremendous help and asset to me.
Probably now, people of our age or younger look at those old Dragnet repeats very affectionately because they bring back a certain time and a certain attitude in television. But like you say, in the 70s, a lot of people of our generation looked at them hostily because he seemed to stand for a blanket stamp of approval on this paramilitary kind of mentality and this very right-wing view of America, and it wasn't so funny or endearing then to us.
Well, Jack was a radio guy. He came out of radio, and time and time again, I worked with him quite a few times as he would direct an episode or something, Emergency or something. I guested on a lot of those shows. And in choosing the difference between take number 1 and take number 2, he'd go to the playback and listen to it. He'd say, take 2, print. He'd come back, and Jack was a great one. He'd roll the camera, and he'd say, okay, action. And you'd say, I go to the market, I'm going to get milk cheese, I'll see you later. You know, and then he'd say, and he'd have a script in front of him, and he'd say, no, Bob, okay, now, Bob, what you say is, you say, I'm going to the market, I'm going to get milk, and I'm going to get cheese. He says, okay, action. And the camera's rolling the whole time. And you're going, I'm going to the market, I'm going to get milk, cheese. And pretty soon, unless you really concentrate, you're going, I'm going to the market, I'm going to get milk, cheese, and print, cut, bye. And pretty soon you were right into that. I mean, you were Joe Friday, you know. And yet, I mean, I saw him eat up more actors than I can even think about, you know. But to me, he was always like this kind of gruff football coach kind of mentality guy, and dead fair. dead fair. You know, I mean, you'd sit there in a scene. I remember once there was this partner of mine, and he was supposed to say, you know, "Hi, Cindy, put Doc Coolidge on and hurry." It's on the phone. He was supposed to say that. Anyway, he couldn't say it. And 5, 6, 7 takes, and it got to be funny, and it started to spread, and we were getting nothing done. And I was standing there with the camera over my back, and anyway, he wrote it on a piece of tape. He stuck it on my chest, and he said, "There it is, damn it, read it," like that. And then, you know, "Put Doc Coolidge on and hurry. Fine, cut, print, go." You know, and that was how he did it. You know, but you know, like, I didn't talk to Jack for a lot of years. We just went different ways and stuff, and I had no way to talk to him really. And out of the blue one day, he called me and he said, "Hey, laddie," he said, "why don't you come on down to the tail of the cock and we'll have lunch." And what that meant with Jack is you met him at 11:30 and you lunch until 5:30, and you know, and he had his table right there, and I went down and we sat for 5, 6 hours, and I listened to him, and we talked, and I heard things that I'd never have a reason to talk to him about, and he gave me things, and 2 days later he died. And I thought about that a lot, because that was like a gift too. You know, that was out of nowhere. I get this call, and just before he left, you know, here was him imparting to me these views that again, from the very beginning, he was the guy to give me my start.
Did he know he was dying, or did he have a heart attack
he had a heart
subsequently?
Attack. Yeah. I mean, Jack was, you know,
So he looked fine, and you had no reason to think he was...
Yeah, he, you know, smoked too much, drank too much, but he always did that. Always wore Red Sox. I mean, he was what he was. Dead-on guy, you know, I mean...
You mentioned that the one scene he put you in at first was walking down the hall with Marty Milner.
Yeah.
Jack himself was great at exiting a room and walking down a hall, because his idea of walking was toy soldier walking. His arms never moved. He held his neck up like this, and everybody he talked to was, especially if he opposed their kind of cultural slant, was his straight man. You know, he would talk to some supposedly radical professor, and the guy would be the greatest straw man you could ever ask for, a complete blithering idiot.
Reality, man, reality. I could see the center of the earth. Purple flame down there, the pilot light. All the way down. Purple flame down there, the pilot light. Pilot light of...
He's clean, Joe.
Creation,
Except
reality.
for these.
Reality.
What's your name, son?
You can see my name if you look hard enough.
Come on now, what's your name?
Don't you know my name? My name's Blue Boy.
What do you think, Joe? Cartwheels?
Oh, sugar cubes. I'll make you book. He's been dropping that acid we've been hearing about.
Every scene would always end with this great head nod. You know, he'd go, you know, and then exit.
Joe, Bill, the real issue here is the degree of danger this drug presents to the psychological health of the user, along with the resultant effect of the user and those around him.
And as of now, there's no law covering the sale and use of LSD.
In a number of cases coming through this lab, I'd say they better give you people something to work with damn soon.
He was great fun, and I do miss him, and I think back about those days. You know, he used to talk and say, you know, I didn't know if you could act. He said, but I tell you what, when you ran that triple option, you used to fake like you had the ball when you didn't have it, and I always thought you had something. So I said, whatever parallel that means, okay. I got the part. I don't care. No.
Your new show on NBC, Reasonable Doubts. You play a police investigator, and you work with the assistant DA played by Marlee Matlin. And, of course, there's some logistical maneuvering with the talking and the signing.
Oh, boy, is there. You know, it's one of those things you bite off that you know up front is going to be a lot of work, and it certainly is. I'm also finding it freeing in a way. That all of a sudden, as you know, in front of a camera, you get your hands right there, and that's where they're supposed to stay. But now, to communicate, the signing becomes part of that, and I'm finding that real enjoyable in one degree. And the other degree is that I'm finding it a little bit like tapping your head and rubbing your stomach. You know, Marlee's a treat to work with, and from the very outset, this whole concept, show-wise, created by Bob Singer, was a real mixing of people and ideas, and just the way it came together, you know, much like you have here, it's the way you want it. And if you're going to spend these kind of hours with these folks, as long as you're going to be here, it's real pleasant circumstances. It's a great character. I mean, I play a guy named Dickie Cobb, who is basically a street cop that gets assigned to work in the district attorney's office for Marlee's character, Tess Kaufman. The backstory is my father was supposedly deaf, and I know some sign, and that's how they look at it, as a promotion for me, and I look at it as a total demotion. I'd rather be by myself doing what I do. And we come at the law from very different points of view. Hers as a public defender, believing that everybody's innocent until proven guilty, and my highly critical attitude of the system, basically thinking that if this bad guy isn't guilty of this, he's guilty of something else, so what's the difference? And it's that kind of combative relationship that will drive the personal conflicts of the story.
You got an extra thing to worry about. An actor worries about blowing a line. Now you can blow a line and a sign.
Oh yeah, a line and a sign, and you know, I mean, all the time. I mean, in the pilot episode, I mean, I'm working signs right and left, and you know, and all of a sudden, you know, you're doing this, and you got two props that you didn't have, and you're trying to hold a towel up with one hand, and this is don't, and this is Polish. And there's a big difference. You know, you say, don't do this, you know, you don't say Polish this. I mean, that makes no sense. So I guess what I'm saying is I make mistakes all the time, and yet in some of those instances, those mistakes carry a comedic area of the show, and Marley plays off them great. And she's been terrifically helpful to work with. I mean, she's been so patient with the way I've kind of stepped forward learning this and learning it slowly.
Reasonable Doubts, Fridays at 10 on NBC with Mark Harmon and Marlee Matlin. Come back with us tomorrow night, folks, because Mark will be here again, and at that time we'll talk about St. Elsewhere, moonlighting, an appearance on Saturday Night Live, and whatever else we can cram into half an hour. For now, see you later.
Thank you for watching Cleveland Live Music. If you like what you see, hit the subscribe button. And in the video descriptions, there's further support options listed. Thanks for making the channel grow so much. Really appreciate it.